Hello everybody, welcome to the Saroy channel. I love you listeners, thank you so much for joining me tonight, and you're really going to love this story. It's all about Bigfoots that were seen during the Vietnam War, and I think you're going to find it a very interesting account. So let's get started. Dear Sarah and all your listeners, I'm writing to tell you about the encounter that my grandfather, called James, and his brother Jackson had with Bigfoots during the Vietnam War. These two accounts are both extremely different, but also very fascinating. I thought you would be interested to hear their accounts. My grandfather told me that his brother Jackson was drafted into the Vietnam War at age 18 in 1969 and had an experience with a creature the people of Vietnam called moi, which means wild men. The locals had reported sightings of these creatures as far back as 1822. Jackson was enrolled with Company D, 1st Battalion 507 Infantry Regiment. One day, he was sitting on the ridge 10 miles from Way City with his army mates, and they were just talking about a friend who had been bitten by a poisonous snake and had died only hours earlier. It was a sad reality that snake bites, especially poisonous ones, were not uncommon at the base. It was a given, my grandfather said, that people did not just die from the ravages of war, if that wasn't bad enough already. He had army mates, he told me, that were killed by tigers, and also 2 friends who died of heat stroke, and 3 who died from serious falls. He said the terrain in Vietnam, especially in the mountainous regions, was rugged and treacherous, and they had to work their way through heavy, dense undergrowth using machetes. They were literally going into areas of Vietnam jungle that few had ever ventured, so it was exceedingly dangerous, especially the unknown factor, which can be a hazardous aspect to any expedition. Going back to the story, his brother Jackson was eating a plate of chicken stroganoff and rice when suddenly they smelt a really nasty odor that they described as smelling like decaying flesh and wet dog blended together in a hideous fragrance. Jackson said the smell was so odiously rank that 2 of the men just threw up violently and could not finish their food. Then he said they suddenly heard the sound of branches being snapped, and they thought they saw the silhouettes of about 8 North Vietnamese soldiers. It was a dreadful case of misidentification. In a panic, they literally fired several rounds with their M16 rifles, and then they heard the most thunderous roar that was unlike anything that they had ever heard in their entire lives. He said it really scared them half to death, and the couple of soldiers were so afraid they were literally shaking in terror, and one was so terrified he shat his pants. Apparently they believed that a roar of the tiger would have been more welcome than that unfamiliar sound. It was then that the creatures made their presence known, and all 8 of them were growling at the soldiers very aggressively. But the most intimidating was the alpha male, who was terrifying in his demeanor and was extremely protective towards the other creatures. The creatures were about 6 foot tall in height. They had thick brown reddish hair all over their bodies, and they even had long tails. They stood on 2 legs, but there was no doubt, according to the men, that these creatures would have been equally comfortable running on all 4s. They had long arms that went well below their knees, and they had human-like hands. The faces were long, the ears covered in hair, and the eyes were deep brown, lips thin, and noses flat. The bodies were lean, slender, athletic, and agile, and the chests were indeed large, at 3 feet across in circumference. The big alpha male was very big in comparison to the 6-footers, because he stood at a huge 8 feet tall and about 700 pounds in weight, but he was furious. The fury was very aggressive and tangible to the soldiers, and they definitely felt fear despite being so superbly armed. The alpha male did a mock charge towards them, although at the time it seemed like a genuine charge. He then ran backwards into the brush, never keeping his eyes off the men. Within seconds, all 8 of them just vanished in 5-foot backward strides and tore into the deep, dense jungle full of thorn needles as if it was nothing. Jackson said the post-traumatic stress the troops experienced was worse than from the ravages of war, and he described what he saw was definitely a creature not known by science, but definitely a mannish kind of monkey that he believed to be a Sasquatch or a Bigfoot. My grandfather's encounter, on the other hand, was totally different, possibly because his encounter did not happen with any aggression whatsoever. In fact, my grandfather describes his sightings of these Vietnamese Sasquatch as one of the most joyous experiences he ever had during the war in Vietnam, or even his whole life. My grandfather's experience happened a year before his brother's in the year 1968. He was 19 years old at the time and had volunteered to join the army. He was at Company M3, 3rd Battalion, 5th Marine. One day my grandfather was taking some exercise on the top of a rocky ridge where he was doing press-ups. He said the men did everything they could to maintain their fitness levels because when you're dealing with life and death situations on a daily basis, you need to be in the best possible physical shape, he told me. He said that as he was doing press-ups, he saw this bipedal creature resembling a man, but it was not a man. It definitely had a primate look to it and was red and brown in color, 6 foot tall, much like the creatures that Jackson had described a year later. This creature was not afraid of my grandfather, not one little bit, and my grandfather was not afraid of it, because its demeanor was gentle and sweet. My grandfather got the impression that this creature was a juvenile, and he guessed it was male, but he could not tell because the hair covering on this creature hid any revealing genitalia. The creature literally made the cutest sound and then copied my grandfather's workout because he thought it was some kind of funny and wonderful game. The problem was, my grandfather said that the creature was so agile, athletic, and efficient at any kind of physical activity that he definitely made my grandfather feel woefully inadequate by comparison, like a sack of potatoes, he said. I remember one day the creature watched me scratch myself senseless. I was itching all over, my grandfather told me. I gather two of the biggest bummers in the Vietnam War was that men hated were the swarming insects and intense humidity. Anyway, the creature gave my grandfather leaves that smelt a lot like lemon balm. Well, when they rubbed the leaves on all the bites, the itching went away and the insects did not attack him again. The creature made all the men laugh because he would mimic everything they did in such a comical way that it was impossible not to smile. The creature followed them around for several days and was always chattering excitedly. He played peekaboo with them the whole time and would watch the men's daily routines with curious intensity. They would give him bananas and fruit, which he enjoyed, but one day they gave him a chocolate bar, and he was so excited when he tasted it. I think he just loved it, my grandfather reflected. There was one occasion that a soldier had been flung into the air by a booby trap because he had failed to keep on the path and had wandered off. Fortunately, he did not lose his life. However, his leg was blown off and left dangling from a tree. The guy received urgent medical attention, and the creature went up and retrieved his leg and presented it to me. The leg was way too damaged to be reattached. I gave the creature a big chocolate bar for that, he told me, laughing at the recall. Anyway, one day we saw the creature go off with two other red creatures, clearly older than he was. I think they may have been Sasquatch elders coming to drag him away from us back into the jungle. They did give us a fleeting, curious glance, and they all went off together. After the creature left, morale sank to an all-time low because everyone missed the creature and his comical ways, and he had spread so much joy among the men. When my grandfather returned to North America, he always talked about the Bigfoot he encountered, and he called the creature Samoy. The Sa was short for Sam, and the Moi was the Vietnamese name for hairy man. He did say that their incredible story fell on deaf ears, although there was a report about it in some journal, but no one believed them and thought it was a tall story. But my grandfather knows what he saw, and it definitely was the Vietnamese Bigfoot. Some people even suggested that he could have met up with orangutan monkeys, which is ridiculous, and furthermore, orangutans cannot be found in Vietnam, but they do have primates there, like the white gibbon. So there you are, That is my grandfather's account of the hairy man. Apparently there were several sightings of Bigfoots with the American soldiers during the war in Vietnam. You see, the soldiers were venturing into thick jungle, misty ridges and ravines, places few humans have ventured before. Even one of the mountains was called subsequently Monkey Mountain after several curious sightings of what some people have called rock apes over the years. There were also stories about rock throwing from these creatures at some of the soldiers, which is why they were called rock apes in the first place. A true account or not, you decide. But this is what my grandfather's account was, and I, for one, emphatically believe him. Love to you and all your listeners. Thank you so much for a phenomenal account from all the way from Vietnam. Do you believe it really happened? Interesting. Well, until next time, good night.